It's very interesting. The ultimate objective of creation is that mankind should have a relation with Hashem, with God. However, we're not qualified to have the relationship with God unless we've achieved a certain degree of perfection within ourselves. Why? Because God is perfect on an absolute level. So to be able to have a relation with him, you have to reflect that aspect of perfection. That's the concept. And that concept of perfection is achieved through one's own free choice by choosing what God determines is the action which brings about perfection, which comes through Torah mitzvos, study of Torah, doing the mitzvos, and not transgressing. That allows us to advance, which is what we call shleimus, perfection. And once we achieve that level of perfection, we're qualified to be able to have a relationship with the one who's perfect on the absolute level. That's the understanding. Now, we had said earlier that since the human being is the center of the universe and every aspect of the creation was created to accommodate his objective, his mission, to achieve perfection. So if he uses the world for that objective, not only does he perfect himself, he perfects all aspects of creation. If creation contributes to the desecration of God's name, that's the farthest thing. That's the antithesis to perfection. But if you use existence, which has the capacity to be the facilitator, the means to bring about perfection, which is God's glory, then not only do you perfect yourself, the world becomes perfected. Once the world becomes perfected, that means the location of existence has relevance to God. Even the most mundane, the most physical, has been spiritualized through its usage and its application that assumes a spiritual persona. Although in its physical makeup, it's physical. For instance, Moshe Rabbeinu was a physical human being. He was flesh and blood. He was subject to death. But nevertheless, we find every aspect of his being was spiritualized due to his dimension of his soul, and the body actually radiated. He radiated holiness. The body was opaque because the body itself, he was able to elevate, advance it, and to perfect it that didn't have the physical impurities of physicality. It was no longer earthy. It took on an ethereal level, although it was physical. So if you use existence and utilize it as a means, not as an end, and its means is to bring about God's glory, so not only does the person perfect himself, all existence being utilized for that, the world itself also reaches a level of perfection. Okay? Now, man was made from what? From the earth. The world is physical. The soul is within the body. The neshama does not be perfected. The soul does not have to be perfected because the soul was created pure, was created in the spiritual realm. The body is physical. The body has to be spiritualized to advance it, to bring into another realm of value, into a spiritual realm. So what is the value of the neshama? The neshama is the facilitator, facilitates the body to be able to elevate to a perfect level through Torah mitzvahs. But the soul itself does not need purification. So what advances the soul? Doing the mitzvah. But it's not a purification of the soul. The soul is naturally pure. The body is not naturally pure because the body is made of the physical, is the earthiness of the earth. The objective of the human being is to take the soul should have the upper hand and utilize every opportunity through Torah and the mitzvos to spiritualize every aspect of that being, to elevate it from the physical into the spiritual. So let's understand. Why does a person decompose? When a person dies, he dies, he's buried. So we discussed this many times, because as the soul is eternal, the body being a partner in every challenge which the soul was involved in, the body also has to be rewarded. That means the physicality of the body has to be part of eternity. But how could it be part of eternity if it itself can never reach the ultimate level of perfection because of the impurity of the Eitz Hadas, of the tree of knowledge, which is embedded in the body? So the body cannot be totally spiritualized, cannot be raised fully to the level of absolute perfection, because the evil, due to the sin of Adam, is embedded in that body. Therefore, the person dies, and then, because he was spiritualized through the Torah mitzvahs, he's part of resurrection, and now the body and soul unite, and because the body is on par with the soul, it has the capacity to be spiritualized by the soul. I'll give you an example. You have a diamond in the rough. But if it's a diamond in the rough, if you cut that properly, the end result is be something magnificent, because you bring out what it is. You take a piece of coal, you could cut it from today forever. As you cut a diamond, it's a piece of coal. The physical body is earthy, except the soul being embedded in the body at the time when a person is born, or the soul is integral to the body. The soul has the ability through Torah mitzvos, which is miraculous, to spiritualize the earthiness of the body, and you can take that body and turn it into that brilliant stone, into the diamond. The soul doesn't have to be purified. The body has to be extricated from its earthiness and to achieve a level of refinement which has to do with spirituality. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu radiated holiness, because he was able to achieve that within his physicality, to spiritualize it to the point that his body was opaque and the soul shone through his body when he was alive. But even Moshe Rabbeinu had to die, because for Moshe Rabbeinu to be part of eternity in the physical sense, he cannot in any way possess any of that evil of the tree of knowledge for that reason. So let's get it straight. The body has to be perfected, because the body is earthy. It has to be elevated to a level of what? Of refinement, which is its spiritualization. That's what it is. The soul doesn't have to be purified, because the soul is naturally pure. Just one moment. It seems from the Arachaim HaKodesh that even though the soul doesn't need perfection, but the soul also has an objective. We had mentioned a human being is comprised of three components: nefesh, which is the physical life source. Then you have ruach, you have the spirit, and then you have neshama, which is the soul. And each one's linked. The objective of a Jew in life is to elevate the nefesh, which is physical, that's the physical life source, to the level of ruach, of spirit. So through Torah mitzvahs, you elevate the nefesh, which has to do with the earthiness of the human being, his physical function, to the ruach, which is a semi-spiritual function. That's part of the spiritualization. And that comes through Torah mitzvahs. Use the body, discuss in a moment, and the ruach should be elevated to the level of neshama. So meaning the neshama could be elevated. The ruach becomes neshama, and the neshama, if it's utilized properly, the neshama advances itself. It's not impurity, but it's a level of advancement. It becomes more spiritualized. It ascends to a level of spiritualization, which has nothing to do with this existence. We find we have Taryag mitzvos. We have 613 mitzvos. Of the 613, 248 are positive commandments. What are positive commandments? Positive means do. They do commandments. Put on tefillin. say Shema, eat matzah, sit in the sukkah. These are all dues. The 248 positive commandments correspond to the 248 parts of the body. They correspond to 248 parts of the soul. We mentioned the name of Rav Chaim Vital, who was the most special student of the Arizal, that there are 248 components in the soul, and there's a correlation between the positive commandments and those components. Between the body, which is 248, which also corresponds to the 248 parts of the neshama, of the soul. So it comes out, according to that, when we do a mitzvah, we're actually infusing that component in the soul with that spiritual energy, so it advances it. And also because the body itself, whether it's the arm, the eyes, the mouth, corresponds to a component in the soul, so that part of the body is being utilized for that infusion, because it's through the activation or the actualization of the mitzvah, are we able to bring about that end result, which enhances the neshama. So the body, which is 248, corresponds to 248 components in the neshama, and we do the 248 positive commandments, we're spiritualizing the physicality, which enriches the neshama. But the difference is, as he says, the body is physical, is earthy. The soul is never earthy. But nevertheless, even though it's not earthy, the soul, but it still needs an infusion to advance it, that it should become part of eternity forever. Okay, that's the understanding. The Chofetz Chaim writes that we read in Pirkei Avos, Schar Ba'el Meleka, that the innate value of a mitzvah is so endlessly valuable, there's not enough time or reward that God can give you for a mitzvah in this world. That's what it is. That's why you cannot be rewarded for a mitzvah in this world. And he explains why. Why is that the result of a mitzvah? He says a person eats every day and you're fully nourished. As much as you're nourished today, if you don't replenish that nourishment tomorrow or the day after, eventually, the person will die. Because the nourishment only lasts up to a point. After that, it totally is expended. It has to be, you need new nourishment. When a person lives, we infuse the soul continuously with spiritual nourishment, spiritual vitality. When a person dies, he's meant to be part of eternity. When you pass away, you're no longer in a position to make those infusions. That means the innate value of mitzvahs when we're alive have that unlimited power that when you infuse them when you're alive, it empowers the neshama that it could be part of eternity. That's the reason why Schar Ba'el Meleka. When God gave us the mitzvahs, they have an innate, unlimited value, because what it has to affect us unlimitedly, that we should be able to be part of eternity, because once we die, we no longer do mitzvahs. For that reason. That's the Chofetz Chaim. But it has nothing to do with the purity of the soul. It's advancing the soul. The body, it's purity of the body. We purify the body, what you call zichuch. And that it allows, now that it's purified, it allows for a spiritualization, because now the soul will impact on the body like Moshe Rabbeinu's soul impacted on his body. That he radiated, because he overcame, he purged it of all its earthiness. He brought a level of refinement that his soul shone through the body, because the body itself is in sync with the neshama. Because every moment, every aspect of the body, of the physical, became part of the soul. There was no barriers. There was no separation between the two of them. That's the understanding. You know, the Talmud tells us that Rabbi Yochanan was one of the sages, leading sages, lived after the destruction of the second temple. He himself had unlimited beauty in terms of beyond being handsome. And not only that, he radiated. He radiated holiness. He passed away, he lived 140 years. Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan is the author of the Jerusalem Talmud. He compiled the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud. The Gemara tells us a story that Rabbi Yochanan went to pay a sick visit to a colleague of his by the name of Rabbi Lozer. Rabbi Lozer himself was impoverished. And Rabbi Yochanan went to pay a sick visit, and he walks into the room. It's dark. He was so poor he didn't have money to afford to illuminate the room. Rabbi Yochanan, who was known, he had a radiance. He radiated. So he comes in the room and he lifts his sleeve, his shirt. And as he lifts his shirt, a radiance comes out and illuminates the room. And he sees his colleague, Rabbi Lozer, crying. He's crying because he's nearing the end of his life. He's on his deathbed. So Rabbi Yochanan says to Rabbi Lozer, why are you crying? Are you crying because you haven't studied enough Torah during your lifetime? It's not a problem. As long as you did your best, as much as you do, as little as you do, as long as you did your best, you're fully accredited. You did your best, so there's no reason to cry. Is because in your lifetime you didn't merit wealth, because by having wealth with Torah together, it brings to another level. It says not every person merits both areas, wealth and spirituality. You merited the spirituality. So if that's the case, why are you crying? You have it all. And what you don't have, because it wasn't meant you should have it. But in terms of your place in the world to come, you're way up there. You're at an advanced level. So he said to Rabbi Yochanan, he says, you know why I'm crying? I'm crying because when you die, your beauty will decompose in the ground and it will no longer be known what that beauty was. That's why I'm crying. So Rabbi Yochanan, when he hears this from Rabbi Lozer, he says, you know something? That's worthwhile crying. And Rabbi Yochanan cried together with him. What's going on? The reason why he's cried is because, not for himself, because ultimately Rabbi Yochanan will meet the fate of Rabbi Lozer, will be on his deathbed, and he dies. And once he dies, that beauty is not going to be existent any longer. Therefore, it's worthwhile to cry. And Rabbi Yochanan bought into it. He cried. What exactly was it? So the way we explained in the past, Adam Rishon, Adam, who was created, initially he radiated a radiance that even the angels had mistaken his radiance for Hashem's radiance. Even after he ate of the tree of knowledge, and that radiance was minimized and diminished, he still radiated. Okay? Yaakov Avinu, because he was the most special of the patriarchs, also radiated. He radiated holiness. We speak about the end of an era. End of an era. We speak about, let's say, the era of the early commentators. Do we even have an inkling of what they were? They were a dimension of greatness. We can't even relate to that. Because everything we relate to, it's within our frame of reference. If it's no longer your frame of reference, it was never your frame of reference, you can't relate to it. Now, the Gemara tells us in Bava Metzia that the beauty of Rabbi Yochanan had a semblance of the beauty of Yaakov Avinu, the most special patriarch. And Yaakov Avinu's beauty was a semblance of Adam's beauty. What are we talking about? Physical beauty. We're talking about this radiance. The radiance of Rabbi Yochanan had a radiance. His radiance had a semblance of Yaakov, most special of the patriarchs. And Yaakov's radiance was the equivalent of Adam. So now we have a link. Rabbi Yochanan to Yaakov Avinu and Yaakov to Adam. That is the connection. As long as Rabbi Yochanan was alive and you saw him and you were a Jew, you had a semi idea of what Yaakov was. Yaakov was the founding patriarch, the most special patriarchs of the Jewish people. And when you have an understand what Yaakov was, maybe you can even have an understanding to a degree of who Adam was, who was the handiwork of God. Once Rabbi Yochanan passes away. It's the end of an era. There's no representation of what that is. As a result of that, you can't even fathom what Yaakov was. Yaakov, the one who fathered the 12 tribes, who was the most advanced of the patriarchs, we have no relevance even to be able to approach it. So when he heard this, Rabbi Yochanan heard Rabbi Elazar saying this, I'm crying over the beauty that will ultimately decompose in the earth. Rabbi Yochanan started to cry, and he says, you know something? For that, it's worthwhile to cry for. That will no longer be a role model or a representation of who Yaakov Avinu was. As a result of that, the level of spirituality and the incentive for it will no longer be there. Therefore, automatically, it's going to plane. It's not going to advance. Or maybe, in God forbid, nosedive. Because we don't appreciate what that is, what that was. What is Yaakov? Why did he radiate holiness? What Yaakov's 12 sons were, he gave each one a blessing to identify what their potential was. All of them combined were not their father. Yaakov possessed every one of those characteristics that his children were, whether it was the Kohen, the Levi, the Yisachar, the Zvul, whatever it was. Each one assumed one aspect of their father. That's who Yaakov was. So you can imagine how Yaakov radiated holiness. If you took a look at Rabbi Yochanan, he had a semblance of that. When you have the semblance of that, that's what we call jet fuel. You take off. Because the only reason why we look at Torah as passé, we've been there, we've read it. But if you really are able to open up and see the secrets and the understanding of what lies in the Torah, it's endless, doesn't end. As it says in Pirkei Avos, as much as you move it, you continuously see new things, continuously. Because everything, the world, the Torah itself was the mechanism through which existence came into being. Physical, terrestrial, celestial, everything. So if you understand what the Torah is saying, you see it all. If you don't understand what the Torah is saying, and you get engaged in other things, then you're wasting your time. That's the understanding. Okay, we're going to stop here.